The fever medicine had stopped working hours ago, leaving me floating somewhere between awake and asleep. Everything looked blurry and wrong. Dr. Martinez kept promising I'd get better soon, but I'd been hearing those same empty words for 2 long weeks. Our old house creaked and groaned around me like it was in pain too. From my bed, I could see the garden where David had gotten down on one knee 28 years ago. Back then, his eyes sparkled with real love, not the cold look he gave me now. The flowers he'd planted for our first anniversary were dying, their brown petals scattered across the ground like tiny graves. My son Jake walked into my room at exactly 6:30 p.m. I'd been staring at the old clock on my nightstand. It was the only thing that kept me company during these endless sick days. Jake never cooked anything. The boy could barely make a sandwich without help. But there he was, wearing my apron, covered in flour like he'd been in a food fight. "Mom, I made you something special," he said, his voice shaking the way it used to when he was little and had broken my favorite vase. "You've been so sick, and I thought maybe homemade soup would make you feel better." I almost laughed, but it hurt too much. 3 months ago, Jake had called me from college asking how to make instant noodles. Now he was standing there with what looked like gourmet soup. But when you're sick and scared, even small kindnesses feel like miracles. Carmen Morales had been our housekeeper since Jake was a baby. She'd practically raised him alongside me, teaching him bad words in Spanish and how to make his bed properly. At 58, she knew every sound this house made, every loose board and squeaky door. But lately, she'd been acting strange, watching me with worried eyes and whispering prayers under her breath. The soup Jake brought looked absolutely perfect. Golden chicken broth with tender meat and fresh herbs floating on top like tiny green boats. It should have made my mouth water, but instead, my stomach twisted with a fear I couldn't explain. Maybe it was just the fever making me paranoid, or maybe it was some ancient warning bell that had kept my family alive for generations. Jake placed the bowl on my bedside table like he was handling dynamite. "I used Great-Grandma Rose's recipe," he said, talking about David's grandmother, who had passed away 3 years ago. From her old cookbook. That cookbook had been missing for months. I'd asked David about it several times, and he'd given me vague answers about cleaning out closets and organizing things. Now it had magically appeared just in time for Jake's first cooking experiment. That's when Carmen's scream cut through the air like a knife through silk. She burst through my bedroom door, her normally calm face twisted with pure terror. In 25 years of working for us, I'd never seen her lose her cool. This was the woman who'd sewn up Jake's knee when he crashed his bike, who'd scared off a burglar with just a wooden spoon, who'd held me while I cried when I lost the baby David never wanted. Holy Mother of God. Don't eat that. Carmen's Spanish accent got thicker when she was scared, and right now she sounded terrified. Her eyes were locked on that soup bowl like it contained a deadly snake. Jake stumbled backward, almost dropping his spoon. "Carmen, what's wrong?" "It's just soup." "No, Mijo." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow seemed louder than screaming. "Something is very, very wrong here." The room went deadly quiet except for the old heater rattling and the sound of David's voice drifting up from his office, where he spent more and more time on secret phone calls. Carmen's hands were shaking as she reached for the soup bowl, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. She was wearing yellow rubber gloves. The kind she only used when cleaning up something dangerous. Jake looked back and forth between us, his confusion turning into real fear. "Mom, I don't get it. I followed the recipe, exactly. I just wanted to help you get well." But Carmen wasn't looking at Jake anymore. She was staring at something behind me, toward the dark hallway where shadows seemed to be gathering like they were planning something evil. When she spoke again, her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "This soup wasn't made to heal you, Senora. It was made to finish the job that fever started." Carmen locked my bedroom door with a sharp click that sounded like a gunshot. Jake stood by the window, still holding that soup spoon, his knuckles white with fear. The fever had made my senses sharper instead of duller, and I could actually smell the terror in the room, sharp and bitter, mixing with the aroma of what might have been my final meal. "Sit down, sweetheart. Carmen told Jake in the same firm voice she'd used when he was 8 and had drawn crayon pictures on the living room walls. But this wasn't about childhood mischief. This was something that had turned my trusted housekeeper into someone I barely recognized. She walked to my dresser like a detective, pulling out things that made my heart pound: a small camera, plastic evidence bags, and a notebook filled with her neat handwriting. How long had she been gathering proof of whatever this was? 3 weeks ago, Carmen began, her voice steady now. I found the basement door wide open at 2 in the morning. You know, I always check the house before bed, Senora. Same routine for 20 years. She showed me a photograph of our basement, but something was wrong with it. Someone had moved the storage boxes, creating a clear walkway to the old bomb shelter David's father had built back in the 1960s. Jake collapsed into my reading chair, the spoon clattering to the floor like broken dreams. Carmen, you're scaring me. I just wanted to make Mom some soup. Why are you acting like I'm trying to murder her? But Carmen ignored him and pulled out another photo. This one showed our refrigerator, with certain items circled in red marker. Your father has been asking a lot of questions about your mother's medications lately. What pills she takes, when she takes them, what foods might cause problems when mixed with her medicine. My mouth went completely dry. David had been paying unusual attention to my medical care, offering to pick up my prescriptions and asking detailed questions about dosages. I thought he was finally showing some concern after years of being distant and cold. The cookbook, Carmen continued, opening it to a page marked with a bright yellow sticky note, appeared in the kitchen this morning like magic. But look at this. She pointed to ingredients scribbled in the margins, additions to Great-Grandma Rose's original recipe. The handwriting definitely wasn't Jake's messy scrawl. Someone wanted Jake to make this exact soup, with these exact extra ingredients, she said, tracing the faint pencil marks with her finger. But they didn't know Jake has his mother's careful personality. He wrote down every ingredient, timed every step, and took pictures to make sure he got it perfect. Jake pulled out his phone with trembling hands, scrolling through photos. I documented everything, Mom. I wanted to show you how hard I tried. His voice cracked, and I realized my innocent son had been used as a weapon against me. Carmen produced another evidence bag containing what looked like ordinary cooking herbs. I found these in the soup pot after Jake finished cooking, hidden under the dirty dishes, like someone hoped they'd get washed away. She held the bag up to the light, and I could see a fine white powder coating the dried leaves. The basement, I whispered as the horrible pieces started fitting together. What did you find down there? A complete chemistry lab, Carmen said grimly. Hidden behind your Christmas decorations. And research, stacks and stacks of research about how certain chemicals affect people with weak immune systems. People who are recovering from serious infections. Jake's face turned ghost white. You think someone wanted to kill Mom? Using my soup? The innocence in his voice broke my heart into a million pieces. Not kill her right away, Carmen corrected, pulling out a thick manila folder I'd never seen before. At least not tonight. Look at these. The folder was stuffed with copies of legal papers, life insurance policies, medical power of attorney documents, even preliminary will readings. All of them dated within the last month. All of them signed by David. Your husband has been very busy, Senora. Very busy preparing for certain possibilities. Jake jumped up and started pacing like a trapped animal. This is insane. Dad loves Mom. He's been worried sick about her fever. But memories were flooding back now, David pushing me to change doctors, his suggestion that we update our wills just to be safe, his casual questions about whether I was getting better or worse. The way he'd brushed off my concerns when I mentioned feeling sicker after certain meals. Carmen, I said quietly, how long have you suspected something was wrong? 2 months, she admitted. Ever since I caught him in your private office at midnight, going through your personal papers. He claimed he was looking for insurance information, but he was taking pictures of your confidential letters from the lawyer. The heater's rattling filled the silence as the terrible truth sank in. David wasn't trying to kill me quickly. That would be too obvious, too easy to trace. He was trying to make my illness worse, to make my death look natural while setting himself up to inherit everything and control Jake's trust fund. The soup, I said as understanding washed over me like a cold wave. It wouldn't have killed me tonight, would it? Carmen shook her head. Probably not. But mixed with your current medications and your weakened condition, it would have landed you in the hospital in critical condition. And once you were there, helpless and getting worse. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Once I was hospitalized and deteriorating, David would have the legal right to make all my medical decisions, to refuse treatments, to sign papers that would let me die. Jake had stopped pacing and was staring at us with the look of someone watching their entire world crumble. What do we do now? Carmen smiled for the first time since she'd entered my room, and it was fierce and dangerous. Now, Mijo, we teach your father that trying to outsmart the women in this house was his biggest and final mistake. The old grandfather clock in the hallway rang 8 times as Carmen and I planned what would either destroy David or destroy us. Jake sat on my bedroom floor with his legs crossed, looking much younger than his 20 years as he tried to process that his father had tried to use him to commit the perfect murder. We need to make him think his evil plan is working, I explained, my voice getting stronger by the minute. Rage, I discovered, was better medicine than anything the doctors had given me. He's expecting me to eat that soup and get violently sick. We're going to give him exactly the show he wants to see. Carmen had already gathered her supplies from the bathroom closet, stage makeup left over from Jake's high school theater days, when she'd volunteered to do makeup for all the school plays. Apparently, her talents went way beyond making actors look good on stage. Your father will come upstairs to check on you within the hour, she said, dabbing gray makeup under my eyes to make the dark circles look worse. He always does when he thinks something important is happening. He'll want to see the results of his handiwork. Jake winced at how matter-of-factly Carmen talked about his father's murderous plans. This feels like the worst nightmare ever. Yesterday, my biggest worry was passing my history exam. Now I'm finding out my dad is some kind of monster. I grabbed his hand and squeezed tight. Your father made evil choices, sweetheart. That doesn't make you guilty of anything, and it doesn't change the fact that you're good and kind and nothing like him. Carmen stepped back to check her work. I looked convincingly sick, pale, waxy skin and bluish lips, exactly like someone whose condition had suddenly taken a turn for the worse. Perfect. Now we need to set up the scene. She pulled a small bottle from her first aid kit, syrup of ipecac, something she'd kept around since Jake was a toddler and might accidentally eat something poisonous. Just a tiny bit mixed with water. It'll make you throw up realistically, but it won't actually hurt you. Won't Dad hear Mom being sick? Jake asked. That's exactly what we want, I replied. Carmen, where is David right now? In his office on the phone. Same mysterious person he calls every night at exactly this time. Someone named Vincent. She pulled out a small recording device. I've been listening to his conversations. The recordings revealed David talking to what sounded like a private detective, discussing spying on me, tracking my medical condition, and most disturbing of all, backup plans for if she doesn't cooperate with the natural progression of her illness. Jake looked like he might throw up himself. He's been planning this for months, hasn't he? Longer than that, Carmen said darkly. I found older recordings hidden in his desk drawer. This whole scheme started before your mother even got sick. The fever just gave him a perfect opportunity. We spent the next 20 minutes rehearsing our deadly performance. Jake would run into David's office, crying and panicked, saying I'd suddenly become violently ill after eating the soup. Carmen would be trying to help but looking overwhelmed and scared. I would be barely conscious, displaying all the symptoms David expected to see. Remember, I told Jake, don't try to act. Just be the terrified son you really are right now. Your genuine fear and confusion will make this believable. At exactly 8:45 p.m., Carmen gave me the ipecac. Within minutes, I was genuinely vomiting into the bowl she'd prepared, my body rejecting the small amount of soup I'd actually tasted earlier as a test. The sounds were violent and alarming, exactly what we needed David to hear from downstairs. Jake didn't need to fake his distress. Watching his mother vomit blood-streaked fluid while plotting against his father was genuinely traumatic. His cries for help carried real panic as he ran downstairs.
Dad.
Dad. Something's terribly wrong with Mom. She can't stop throwing up. I heard David's office chair scrape across the wooden floor, followed by quick footsteps on the stairs. He appeared in my doorway wearing an expression of appropriate concern, but Carmen and I both caught the brief flash of satisfaction that crossed his face when he saw me writhing weakly in bed. "What happened?" he demanded, rushing to my bedside with practiced authority. "The soup," Jake sobbed. "She ate the soup I made, and then she got so sick so fast." David's fingers found my wrist to check my pulse, and I felt him mentally cataloging my symptoms with the thoroughness of someone who'd researched exactly what to expect. "We need to call an ambulance," he announced, though his tone suggested he wasn't in any hurry to do so. "I already tried," Carmen lied smoothly. "The phone lines are down because of the storm. Cell phone service is awful up here tonight." David's face showed a flicker of genuine annoyance. This wasn't part of his carefully crafted plan. He'd expected to play the heroic husband rushing his wife to the hospital, not be trapped in the house with a dying patient. "She needs water," he said, heading toward my bathroom. "I'll get her some fluids." But Carmen smoothly blocked his path. "The doctor said absolutely no liquids when she's vomiting this badly. It could make everything much worse." I watched David's jaw clench as Carmen systematically prevented his attempts to either help me or make my condition worse. He was caught in his own performance now, forced to play the worried husband while his carefully orchestrated murder plot spun completely out of his control. "Maybe we should try the phone in your office again," Jake suggested innocently. "Sometimes that line works better than the kitchen phone." David nodded eagerly, desperate to escape the room and probably call his mysterious Vincent about this unexpected development. The moment his footsteps faded down the hallway, Carmen's smile turned predatory. "Phase 2 starts now," she whispered. "Time to spring our trap." Our house had transformed into a theater, and David was unknowingly playing his part to perfection. While he retreated to his office to make what he thought were secret phone calls, Carmen and I put the final phase of our revenge plan into action. Jake stayed with me, genuinely shaken but now understanding that his fear and anger were weapons we could use against his father. "Vincent, things have moved much faster than we planned." David's voice drifted up from downstairs, confirming that Carmen's spying had been spot on. "The soup worked quicker than we expected. She's much sicker than we thought she'd be." Carmen had planted listening devices all over the house weeks ago, a smart move born from her growing suspicions. Now we could hear every word of David's conversations with his partner in crime. "No, I can't rush her to the hospital yet. It has to look completely natural, like a slow decline. If she goes in now and they do a bunch of tests." David's voice faded, but the meaning was crystal clear. Jake buried his face against my shoulder, and I felt his tears soaking through my nightgown. "How can he talk about you like that? Like you're just some obstacle he needs to remove." I stroked his hair with hands that trembled only partly from my fake illness. "People turn into monsters one small step at a time," I whispered. "One tiny compromise leads to another until they can justify absolutely anything." Carmen returned from her spy mission with news that made my blood freeze solid. "He's been talking to someone at City General Hospital, a Dr. Richardson who apparently owes him big favors from their college days." The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. David wasn't just planning to let me die naturally. He had medical contacts who could ensure my death looked completely unavoidable. A convenient heart attack caused by the stress of infection, maybe, or organ failure from the prolonged fever. "There's much more," Carmen continued, producing David's laptop computer, which she'd somehow obtained during her investigation. Email conversations going back 8 months. He's been researching untraceable methods to worsen someone's medical condition. The emails revealed a calculating monster. David had consulted with pharmacists about dangerous drug interactions, researched symptoms of various poisonings that could mimic natural disease progression, and even contacted home healthcare agencies about hiring nurses who might be flexible with their reporting requirements. "Jake," I said quietly, "I need you to do something incredibly brave." My son straightened up, and I saw some of his grandfather's strength enter his posture. "Whatever you need, Mom. Go downstairs and tell your father I want to see him. Tell him I want to discuss changing my will." that I'm scared I might not make it through this. Jake's face went pale as paper. Mom, what if he tries to? He won't hurt me with you standing right there as a witness. He's too clever for that kind of obvious mistake. But I need to watch his reaction when I offer him exactly what he thinks he wants most. As Jake left on his dangerous mission, Carmen revealed the final piece of our trap. She'd contacted her brother-in-law, Detective Miguel Ramirez, who worked for the state police. He was currently hiding outside our house with recording equipment and backup officers, waiting for our signal to move in. David thinks he's been so brilliant, but he made one fatal error, Carmen said, adjusting the tiny camera she'd hidden near my dresser. He completely underestimated how much I love this family. And he definitely underestimated how much evidence a suspicious housekeeper can collect when she sets her mind to it. David appeared in my doorway within minutes, his face wearing an expression of loving concern that made my skin crawl with disgust. Jake says you want to talk about your will? Darling, you don't need to think about such depressing things. You're going to pull through this. I let my voice crack with convincing weakness. But what if I don't recover? What happens to Jake? To the house? I need to know he'll be protected. David moved closer, and I saw the hungry gleam he couldn't quite hide anymore. Of course I'll take care of everything. You don't need to worry about complicated details when you're this desperately ill. But the trust fund, I persisted weakly, and my grandmother's antique jewelry collection. I want to make absolutely sure. I'll handle every single detail, David interrupted, his greed now barely contained. You just focus all your energy on trying to get better. I watched him mentally inventory my apparent deterioration, the waxy, pale skin, the labored breathing, the way my hands shook when I reached for tissues. He was calculating exactly how long he'd need to wait before my natural death could occur. There is one small thing, I said, letting my voice drop to a whisper that forced him to lean much closer. I know all about Vincent. David's entire body went rigid as stone. What did you just say? I know about all the emails, the careful planning, the research into making my illness progressively worse. I managed a weak smile. Did you really think I was too sick to notice the extra herbs you had added to Jake's soup? The same herbs from your secret basement laboratory. His mask of loving concern dropped completely. David's face transformed into something cold and reptilian, all pretense of caring about me evaporating like morning mist. You don't actually know anything. I know you've been slowly poisoning me for months. I know you plan to use our innocent son as your unknowing accomplice tonight. And I definitely know about Dr. Richardson at City General. David's hand moved toward the pillow beside my head, and for one terrifying moment, I wondered if we'd pushed him too far too fast. But Carmen chose that perfect instant to step out from behind the door, her phone held high and obviously recording everything. And we know about your plan to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could make all my medical decisions. I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. We know about the forged legal documents and the medical professionals you've bribed. David spun toward Carmen, his face twisted with pure rage. You interfering bitch. This is absolutely none of your damn business. Wrong answer, you bastard, Carmen said calmly, just as our front door exploded open and Detective Ramirez announced his presence with the full authority of the law. Jake appeared in the doorway behind the officers, his young face hardened with a new understanding of the evil man who had raised him. It's completely over, Dad. Our house filled with official voices and legal procedures as Detective Ramirez and his team systematically tore apart David's carefully constructed murder plot. I watched my husband transform from a calculating predator back into the charming man I'd married, as if the arrival of law enforcement had flipped some switch designed to fool the public. This is all a terrible misunderstanding, David protested as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists with a satisfying metallic sound. My wife has been extremely ill. She's been having hallucinations and saying things that make no sense whatsoever. But the mountain of evidence Carmen had collected was absolutely overwhelming. Months of photographs, secret recordings, and carefully documented suspicious behavior created an ironclad case of premeditated attempted murder. The basement chemistry lab, The forged legal documents, the communications with Vincent, who turned out to be a corrupt private investigator specializing in problematic insurance cases, everything combined to seal David's fate. Jake sat beside my bed, gripping my hand tightly as we watched paramedics examine me with genuine medical concern. The theatrical makeup had been washed away, revealing that while I was definitely on the road to recovery, I was nowhere near the death's door David had been trying to push me toward. The truly twisted irony, Detective Ramirez explained as his team processed our house like a crime scene, is that your husband's poisoning plan was actually working perfectly. The substances he'd been secretly adding to your food over the past 3 months were specifically designed to suppress your immune system and prevent your recovery from the infection. Carmen nodded with grim satisfaction. That's exactly why your fever kept coming back, just when you thought you were finally getting better. He was making absolutely sure you stayed sick and weak. The full scope of David's betrayal became crystal clear as investigators examined all the evidence. He'd been planning my murder for over a year, triggered by a private conversation with our financial advisor about the massive inheritance I'd received from my father's business empire. Money that would automatically go to Jake if I died, with David serving as the legal trustee until our son reached 30. $67 million, Detective Ramirez stated matter-of-factly. That's what your father's technology patents were ultimately worth when the final sale went through last year. I hadn't even known the exact final amount. The lawyers and accountants had handled everything while I was busy dealing with my father's funeral arrangements and my own overwhelming grief. David, however, had clearly been paying extremely close attention to every financial detail. Jake's voice was small and heartbroken when he finally spoke. All those times he asked detailed questions about your health, about your medications and treatments, he was gathering intelligence to use against you, wasn't he? I squeezed his hand reassuringly. He was, sweetheart. But he made one crucial mistake. He completely underestimated the people who truly love me and would fight to protect me. Carmen smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks, her relief obvious as David was escorted from our house in handcuffs like a common criminal. 35 years I've worked for this family, she said with fierce pride. I wasn't about to let some greedy monster destroy everything we've built together. The police investigation revealed layers upon layers of David's deception that shocked even the most experienced detectives. He'd been systematically building corrupt relationships with medical professionals, bribing home healthcare workers to provide false reports about my condition, and even researching how to forge convincing suicide notes in case his natural death scenario didn't progress as smoothly as planned. The soup tonight, Detective Ramirez explained in detail, contained a carefully calculated combination of herbs that would have reacted very badly with your current prescription medications. Not enough to kill you immediately, but definitely enough to put you in the hospital in critical condition. From there, your husband could have made medical decisions that would have accelerated the final outcome. Jake shuddered visibly. He would have convinced the doctors to just let you die. Or actively help speed up the process, Carmen added with dark knowledge. I found hypodermic syringes hidden in his office safe, along with extensive research about air embolisms and how they're virtually impossible to detect during routine autopsies. The house felt completely different with David gone, as if some malevolent evil spirit had been permanently exorcised from our home. Jake began showing signs of becoming the confident young man he was meant to be, finally freed from the subtle psychological manipulation his father had been subjecting him to for months. I kept sensing something was terribly wrong, Jake admitted as we sat together the next morning, golden sunlight streaming through windows that seemed brighter without David's dark shadow looming over everything. The way he'd ask me to spy on your condition, to photograph your meals, to document when you seemed to be getting worse. I thought he was just being an unusually concerned husband. He was training you to be his perfect alibi, I realized with a chill. If his murder plan had succeeded and I'd died, you would have been the innocent witness who could testify that your father seemed desperately worried about me, that he'd done everything humanly possible to save my life. Carmen brought us fresh coffee and her famous homemade cinnamon rolls, the first food I genuinely enjoyed in months. The district attorney believes we have more than enough evidence for attempted murder in the first degree, she reported with satisfaction. Your husband is going to spend the rest of his miserable life in prison. As the initial shock began to fade, Jake started asking the difficult questions that would help him process and heal from this ultimate betrayal. How long do you think he was actively planning to kill you? When did he stop loving you and start seeing you as just an obstacle to remove? I thought carefully before answering. I believe the detailed planning began when he learned about the full extent of the inheritance money. But the emotional distance and coldness that started several years ago. I just didn't want to admit the truth to myself. The painful reality was that David had been gradually checking out of our marriage, becoming increasingly distant and calculating in his interactions with me. I'd attributed his behavior to a typical midlife crisis or work-related stress, but now I could see it had been the slow transformation of a man who had chosen greed and selfishness over love and family. 6 months later, as David's murder trial reached its dramatic conclusion, Jake and I sat in the courtroom watching justice finally unfold. Carmen sat beside us, her crucial testimony having been instrumental in securing the prosecution's case. David's expensive defense attorney had tried desperately to paint him as a man driven to temporary insanity by financial pressures, but the evidence of long-term premeditation was far too overwhelming to overcome. Attempted murder in the first degree with special circumstances, the judge announced with finality. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. As David was led away in shackles, he looked back at us one final time. I saw no trace of remorse or regret in his eyes, only the cold calculation of a sociopath already planning his appeals process. But Jake squeezed my hand tightly, and I realized that while David had tried to destroy our family, he had actually made us infinitely stronger and closer. That evening, Carmen prepared a celebration feast, chicken soup made from Great-Grandma Rose's authentic recipe, with absolutely no sinister modifications. As we sat around our kitchen table like a real family, Jake raised his glass of sparkling apple cider and a toast. To Carmen, he said with deep emotion, "For saving Mom's life and teaching me that real family isn't just about shared blood. It's about the people who would risk everything to fight for you when evil comes calling." Carmen wiped happy tears from her eyes with her favorite apron. To family, she agreed warmly. To real family. And for the first time in over a year, our house truly felt like home again. And if you liked this story, give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more shocking tales. Click the box on the left. Your next adventure is waiting.